Welcome to Dr Joe Unplugged. The topics discussed in this podcast will reflect my opinions and are not in any way to be regarded as medical advice.
This is a staggering statistic. Now, it comes out of America, and it was a study published in Pediatrics, and it was done by researchers from Harvard. They analysed data on 4 million children over a period of time, and that was between 2020 and 2022. I think a lot of people will remember what else happened during that period of time. And this analysis of 4 million children found that teenage girls experienced a jump in emergency room visits for mental health challenges, but boys, there was no increase, which is interesting. But that's not the staggering statistic. The staggering statistic is that prescriptions for antidepressants for girls aged 12 to 17 went up by 130% in 2 years. Meanwhile, and again, this is staggering, and as usual, we'll put links in the description. Prescriptions for boys aged 12 to 17 dropped by 7.1%. And as the author says, same pandemic, same lockdowns and isolation, but somehow this massive increase in depression, which required treatment with medications, only affected girls, and boys were immune, with a question mark. The researchers have a view, in inverted commas, cultural norms often socialise girls towards expressing internalising behaviours such as anxiety and depression, whereas boys may exhibit more externalising behaviours. So I suppose that's a fancy way of saying boys are more likely to act it out physically. But even so, that discrepancy between a 130% increase and a 7% drop, I think actually needs somewhat more assessment rather than a little bit of, well, girls and boys are different. And they are different, don't get me wrong. Although, interestingly, when it suits sometimes the very same people, they'll say, no, it's all the same. They can compete equally against each other in sports. There's no differences. There are. I might get struck off for saying that, but there you go. But we should be interested in this. Now, this data comes out of America, and yes, prescriptions for medications are higher there than in a number of other jurisdictions. But there was suggestions out of Australia as well, certainly of an increase in mental health presentations, and including to emergency departments, and an increase in prescriptions, and was also disproportionately affecting girls. Now, it's important to point out that use of antidepressants in teenagers is a very fraught area. There is actually an increased risk, and some of these medications actually have a black box warning in the United States, that there is an increased risk in suicidality with some of these medications. That's not to say that they can't or shouldn't or can never be used, but it would suggest that there needs to be, again, as with a lot of medications, good reasons to do so. Now, unfortunately, good reasons to do so has no exact definition. A useful definition is that the benefits are likely to outweigh the harms, and another one is that there are benefits. And a lot of work has shown that with the SSRI antidepressants, that in mild and moderate depression, there's no difference between placebo and use of medication. Severe depression, something different, but in mild and moderate, no difference between placebo and medication. Ouch. Now, another important point here, it's a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's an important point to make, is that often people, when they are treated, and this is with mild and moderate depression, they do feel better. And it's postulated, and this is likely to be the case, but again, we can't be 100%, is that they're feeling better because they're taking the tablet rather than because of what the tablet is doing. And that's where, if people are given a placebo, they may also feel better. It's because they're taking a tablet. Maybe they feel they've been listened to. They feel that somebody is taking it seriously enough to issue a prescription. And so they feel better. But the people on the placebo don't feel, so the people on the active medication don't feel any better than the people on the placebo in mild and moderate. But it is, and that's across all age groups, but in teenagers, and again, this is for both boys and girls, it should be used very judiciously. But things should actually be really bad enough, and again, I do have to emphasise that is a relative term that has no absolute criteria, to warrant putting on medications. And then there's that other really interesting concept of the medicalisation of life that says that the teenage years can be full of angst. And this is not particularly new. And it's been portrayed in literature and in artworks and in TV shows and in movies. Teenage angst is a thing. There are changes during teenage years, although we know that, both obviously physically and also mentally. And the teenager is starting to emerge as their own person, separate from their parents. I mean, again, physically, obviously, they're separate, but starting to make their own way in life a little bit, not to a full extent as a 13 or 14-year-old, but a little bit more influenced by peers, a little bit more curious about what's going on in the world generally. And the changes in the body can be, sometimes stressful, especially if you become, for girls who go through early menarche, that's when the periods start, boys who suddenly shoot up, or girls who suddenly become taller and become the tallest in the class. Not everybody develops and matures at the same rate because we're all different. We're all individuals. And that can create some pressure. And, peer pressure in any age group can be an issue, but certainly in teenagers, gossip groups, and all of this is not new, but has been made worse by social media. Once upon a time, if they were gossiping at school, it probably stopped at school. Yes, people could have phone conversations, and this is in the days of landlines, but it'd be one-to-one, and yes, they could pass notes, but passing a note is not putting on the World Wide Web where everybody can see it. So the underlying principles are the same, but the mechanisms for it to go far wider are much greater in this modern era, obviously. The problem really is that I don't think anybody's really asking why, and again, according to this data, why potentially up to 1 in 3 teenagers are being prescribed antidepressant drugs in America. And again, it's a disproportionate percentage of those are female. And it may well be that some of them do need it. Maybe some of them need to have a chat with somebody. Maybe some of them need to take up some exercise. Maybe some of them need to be told that what they're experiencing is actually quite normal. Being worried before the prom or the formal or the dance, whatever you call it, can be quite normal. Breaking up with your first boyfriend or girlfriend can be stressful. That's quite normal. Having exams can be quite normal. Worrying about whether you're going to get picked for the sports team or not can be quite normal. So that there are normal teenage anxieties and angsts has sort of, again, been redefined as every issue has to have a medical cause. And so we can define it now, not just you're having a bad hair day, but you've got a psychiatric condition, be it anxiety or depression or others. And if you've got a medical condition, then obviously it needs a medical treatment, and the most likely medical treatment is going to be a prescription, and in this instance, a prescription for an antidepressant. And in principle, and I really do want to emphasise this really, really important point, there is a role for that, but I think there's a fair question as to whether there's such a massively increased role, and are people being overdiagnosed? So is having a bad day being redefined as you've got a medical condition? And I suspect there is a lot of that. And it isn't just confined to America, although obviously perhaps more so than in other countries. So what's the solution? Look, I haven't got an absolute solution. If I was, I'm sure there'd be people who'd be paying me significant amounts of money for it. But there are some basic principles, and the basic principles can be getting back to broadening rather than narrowing what we accept as just part of life. Feeling sad can be part of life. Feeling anxious can be part of life. Feeling that you're not having a very good day can be part of life. Being upset if you've broken up with somebody you were close to is part of life. Being worried about exams is part of life. Being upset about maybe breaking up in a friendship group can be part of life. Having some concerns about what's going on with your body, if you don't completely understand it, can be part of life. All of this can be resolved and worked through with a little bit of understanding, a little bit of like empathy and comforting, and perhaps some of those basics like getting out and doing some exercise, getting enough sleep, getting off screens, eating more real food rather than a lot of processed foods. And after all of that, yes, there may still be a role for other treatments, and that other treatments can or might include medication. There's one other factor in all of this, which is the way that the adults have stopped being the adults in the room. Once upon a time, the role of adults was to be calming if children were worried. I'm talking about global issues, and that can include the climate. That, there's a problem, but, we're going to work on it, and you don't need to worry about it because there's ways of dealing with it, and it might take a bit of time, but we'll do it. People lived through wars, like the First World War and the Second World War, and I cannot envisage any world where parents, even when bombs were going off, were saying to their kids, well, it's been nice knowing you, isn't this terrible? They would have been saying, look, we're going to have to bunker down. Look, this is a hard time, but you know what? We're going to do our best and we'll look to get through it. And sometimes they didn't. But that still doesn't mean that it isn't right to be looking to comfort children rather than arc up their fears. It's not that hard. It really is not that hard. And teachers that encourage children by arcing up their fears and then tell them they've got to go out and protest in the street about the weather, no. Children should be being reassured that the adults are doing what they can. And it's not about telling lies or fairy tales to children. It's basically saying to children, this is not your responsibility. This is for the adults to deal with. You concentrate on being a kid and having a nice life, or the best life that you can have in the circumstances. And comforting rather than arcing up fears. So I suspect that's also part of it. But again, it's probably not a very PC thing to say and doesn't fit with the narrative. We need to do better for our children. I think that is a given. And as usual, actually being honest about what we have been doing, and that includes helicopter parenting and getting away from giving children support, empathy, encouragement, and, where need be, useful advice, and maybe replacing that all of that with medication probably is not a step forward. So we can and need to do better.
Thanks for listening to Dr. Joe Unplugged. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, share, and consider subscribing. Tell your friends. If there are topics you'd like to see covered, be in touch through the chat or email info@drjoe.net.au. We'll be uploading new content each Monday, and soon we'll be putting these videos out on X. You can follow me there at Dr. Joe's DIY Health.